my longtime court-appointed special advocates has been assigned to her now 18-year-old case child since she entered the dependency system when she was 11 years old. And this young lady has always excelled in school and has been enrolled in gifted and talented programming since she was in 5th grade. She's also always suffered from anxiety, and her CASA has supported her in finding a therapist who is a good fit for her, and also encouraged her to explore equine therapy, which she still participates in and she loves. And when she started high school, she told her CASA that her anxiety was starting to feel overwhelming for her, especially at school when it came to test taking. And the school was sympathetic and supportive, but she still had a very hard time talking to the school and her teachers about any accommodations they could provide for her. And she was feeling extremely defeated and at a loss as to what to do next. And her CASA, who was also her educational rights holder, despite some initial reluctance and pushback from the school, strongly advocated for this young lady to receive a 504 plan to accommodate her disability, which in this instance was an anxiety disorder. And with that, receive extra time on tests in a smaller setting at school. And immediately after that, this young lady's grades improved again and went back to straight A's. And the difference was immediate and profound. And this teenager just needed someone to listen, support, and advocate for her. And this story, I think, is especially meaningful to me because this young lady graduated as the valedictorian of her high school and is now in her 2nd year of college, and she is studying social work.
Well, hello.
This is Gina.
And this is Don.
With Focused Healthy Family. And today, this is podcast number 49. We are talking with Diana Woldt-Gorsich with Voices for Children in San Diego, California. But before we get to our conversation, let's hear a word from our sponsor. And become a Q Sciences rep because I really believe in the quality of these products. One of our children went to a neurologist and had some testing done, and they talked about nutrients being absorbed. We can give our bodies vitamins and minerals, but if we can't properly absorb them, then they're not doing what they need to do. We might as well be throwing our money down the drain.
Or like somebody told me, flushing it down the drain too, because it's going straight through you.
And so one huge example of this, vitamin D. Normal levels are, I think, at least 20, but when you talk to real nutritional practitioners, they say it really needs to be higher than that. It's very linked to depression and mental health, but most doctors, if it gets in the 20s, they say that's good. Healthy levels go up to, I don't think 100 or more. You can look up those statistics. I don't have that in front of me. So we've been taking a thing I get online that's a vitamin D, K2, that's supposed to help absorb each other. It's a clean, relatively clean product without additives and other things that I get online. My child's vitamin D levels were at 27 and not going anywhere, despite being on 1,000 milligrams and upping it to 2,000. And then we switched her to the Q Sciences has a spray. The spray, it gets absorbed into your system faster.
Methylated.
It's methylated, so it's for easier absorption. And so we switched to her using the spray once a day for a month. She went back for more labs. Her levels had jumped to 47 in just a month's time. And that told me we're throwing our money down the drain with the other supplement. I'm not buying that anymore for any of us. Realizing the power of quality supplements. And it's tough because you can order things online, but there's no guarantee you're getting what you're actually getting, even if it's from a reputable company. Not to bad talk anyone, but we get things through Amazon. We have Subscribe and Save, and
it's easy.
We get discounts because of it, and it's more cost effective, and yet do we really know what we're getting? So I got into it because of the quality of the products. I really am impressed with the company. They're really good quality products, and I've been really impressed with them. And so I share that story just because the impact that has, and just seeing those lab results to me is really powerful.
So they have sprays, the different sprays, sleep spray, which is excellent too. We use that. Their complex of vitamins is They're micro too, if I'm not mistaken.
Micronutrients, yeah. The
Micronutrients.
sleep spray has 5-HTP, melatonin, L-theanine, all known to help with calming and sleep. And there's a B12 spray. There's a vitamin C spray.
They also have CBD.
Yes, they have a large selection of high quality. Well, it's
quality.
Full spectrum hemp oil,
Yeah.
not just CBD.
There
It's
you
the
go.
full spectrum hemp, which is the whole plant, getting all the nutrients that can be helpful for all levels of healing. We have a topical cream I've used, and I want more of it, rubbed on achy joints and muscles. I've used they even have a THC-free hemp oil for anyone who's concerned about drug testing, that it's completely free of the THC component. I have been super impressed with the ingredients that are in these different products. So if you want to learn more,
go to focusedhealthyfamily.com/Q Sciences. That's just the letter Q, Sciences, and you can find out all about this. Try it out.
yeah.
And we're back. In today's podcast, we're talking with Diana Woldt-Gorsich. Diana works with Voices for Children in San Diego, California. She is a senior advocacy supervisor at Voices for Children. She had worked in early intervention specialist for 13 years in school and in private clinics in early intervention special education. In 2014, she started at Voices for Children as an advocacy supervisor. She supervises a caseload of CASAs, which are court-appointed special advocates. She helps train them and new staff and assists with the Children's Activities Program, which provides for the CASAs and youth opportunities for special outings due to generous donations from the community, partners such as the Zoo, SeaWorld, and Legoland. And welcome, Diana. We'd love you to tell us more about Voices for Children and to start this conversation with you. So thank you for being here.
Thank you so much, Donna Jean. I'm so happy to be here. Thank you for that introduction. And just to give you a little bit more background about Voices for Children in San Diego and our CASA, or Court Appointed Special Advocate Program. So some historical background. In around 1976, a juvenile court judge in Seattle had a very difficult decision in front of him with one of his cases. And he felt he had insufficient information that was needed to make what would essentially be a life-changing decision for a 3-year-old before his bench who had suffered from abuse. And after reflecting for a long time on how he could gather more information for future cases, he came up with the idea and model for what would eventually become the Court Appointed Special Advocate, or CASA, program to train volunteers to gather information for the juvenile court to represent the best interests of children in the foster care system. And our San Diego program, which I've been part of since 2014, Voices for Children, was founded in 1980 and expanded to include Riverside County in 2015. And we are the largest CASA program in California and one of the 3 largest programs in the nation. And in San Diego, we are the only agency authorized to have advocates in juvenile court.
And I'll remind our audience that a full description will be up on the description of the podcast itself.
Yes. So
we'll have more information.
more in-depth bio to learn more about Diana and the wonderful work she does. And
I had a quick question. Could you talk about you're the 3rd largest in the country, I think is what you said, correct?
Yes, that's correct.
Is it the fact of just the population there is big, or do you do something different that makes your organization larger?
That's a great question. I feel it's an interesting question too, because I think it would be the inclination of someone to hear that statistic and think it must be because we're such a large population. But really, it's not. San Diego is a very small population compared to some other parts of the nation and to other states. And certainly, we did increase our geographical reach when Riverside County was joined with our San Diego organization in 2015. But I think that we have larger numbers of CASAs who represent children in foster care because we've been in existence for so long.
Wow.
So I think that long amount of time has allowed us to really establish ourselves in the community and focus on growth and recruitment, both for our organization and to focus on having more CASAs join the organization and volunteers over time through various campaigns.
That makes a lot of sense. I want to circle back around to the story you told at the beginning. You had given us a bunch of information, and it just gives me chills hearing that story and just the power of someone to speak up for the child. We've interviewed some other people talking about foster care and that component of having that special education plan, the 504 plan for the child. And if a teacher doesn't speak up, and if there's no parent to speak up for that child, these kids are obviously falling through the cracks. And she, her grades could have gone way downhill, and she could have even dropped out of school. There are bright children out there who are really talented, but without that support, don't complete their education or be able to go on to do other things. So I'd love to hear more just about how that all works. You mentioned it was a little difficult. There was some pushback from the school for the CASA to become the child's advocate, and I'm curious about that process.
That's a great question. I think that certainly in our line of work with all of our individual cases and individual CASAs who represent children in foster care, there are such variations in circumstances. And I think for that particular circumstance, which isn't completely unique, I had mentioned, I think, that one of the biggest issues that CASAs can become involved with on behalf of their case child and really make a difference is in the area of educational advocacy. I think in that particular instance, though, for a child who is intellectually and academically gifted, perhaps it's sometimes difficult for a school to understand or maybe pursue how anxiety could affect a child who, from all outward appearances, should be able to succeed. And I think maybe it's a little more challenging to conceive at that point of how a child who is academically gifted needs support and what kind of support could make a difference. So I think in this instance, a teenager had tried to advocate for herself. She'd met with somewhat limited success. And what we were starting to see was maybe a little bit of giving up and feeling defeated and stepping back from the process.
Sure.
And that's definitely what we don't want to see. And that's where our CASAs really can come into play and play such an important role. They encourage their case children and say, don't give up and tell me more about the situation and what you need. And let's try to problem solve together. So I think that's sometimes our case children feel a little bit alone, and maybe they don't always have the naturally built-in supports that a child who is not in the foster care system might have. And so for this example, the CASA was that person to step in and be the adult who could help bridge the gap between this young lady talking to the school directly. She stepped in to also talk to the school directly and push a little bit more for options and accommodations in a problem-solving role.
That's wonderful.
Well, it's interesting because, what we see it with parents, if the child, and a lot of times with anxiety disorders, the child's very intelligent, and one parent of the two will look at it as, well, they're smart enough, they should be able to figure that out, and they shouldn't have to go through all this or have that anxiety. They just work it out, and that isn't true at all. They don't realize that there's really something going on up here that is hindering them from getting what they want or doing what, even if they're intelligent.
Right. And you bring up a big point there. We've talked a lot about mental health and just managing that with two parents involved or one parent versus in the foster care system. But children who are exceptionally bright do have higher instances of anxiety, and kids who are labeled what we call twice exceptional, so they're gifted and they have something else like anxiety or another disorder or illness, it adds to that stress. And those kids need special attention, and they often need a special program like a 504 plan or an IEP plan because of those issues. And I think it's an area that definitely gets overlooked for a lot of kids. We have a child that falls in this category as well. And losing my train of thought for a minute.
I'll see if the train can come back. Well, you did talk about the educational rights holder, and I thought that was interesting
Right.
too.
That's a specific title or something, because I guess typically it would be the parent, right? So if it's not a parent, is it the foster parent? Like, does that fall on?
The system itself, if they don't have a foster parent.
Yes, another great question. So the default, from what I have seen in the cases I have supervised over the years, has been that biological parents, even when a child is in the foster care system, usually hold educational rights for their child. So that remains until there is a reason why, usually a social worker feels that the biological parent is no longer able to successfully hold educational rights. So some examples of that might be when a biological parent is no longer attending school meetings. So for a child perhaps who is already in special education, when they enter into the foster care system, so already have an existing IEP, perhaps that biological parent who's holding educational rights is not showing up to IEP meetings. At that point, the problem becomes that there is no one who is available to make educational decisions on behalf of that child, and there's no one available to sign an updated IEP or sign updated assessment forms for more needed special education assessment. And so there are several options for social workers when that problem arises. And sometimes it is a resource parent, or what used to be referred to as a foster parent. Sometimes it could be maybe a relative who's involved, but oftentimes that a CASA is asked to hold educational rights for their case child. And CASAs, by virtue of their assignment to their case and the court order that they have, they already are guaranteed access to the school, to all educational documents. They talk to school professionals. So the involvement, commitment, and advocacy is already there in the CASA role. It's just an extra step for a CASA who is assigned as educational rights holder to then have the ability to sign off on special education assessment and documentation.
That makes a lot of sense. It did get me thinking about something sort of whatever adjacent to that idea as far as healthcare rights. And if there's ever a situation where the child's in the hospital, be it a medical issue or a mental health issue, what rights does the CASA representative have in that situation?
CASAs do have access to most documentation for their case child, and that would include mostly for the purposes of writing their reports that they present to the court, reporting on medical needs and information. I would say that the majority of issues with healthcare, including perhaps mental health issues, start with the social worker, but our CASAs are also often involved in that process, especially when it comes to mental health needs, which many of our children in foster care have mental health needs. And something they all have in common is having suffered from abuse or neglect of some kind. And I would say 90%, maybe more, of my case children over 10 years have received some type of therapy at some point in their juvenile court case. And so CASAs are involved in that process in terms of checking in with therapists or making sure a therapist is assigned if their case child is in need of therapy, and also talking about goals in therapy, what progress their case child is making on those goals. So definitely involved in the process to that extent. And with that, have access to therapists to talk anecdotally about therapeutic progress.
Okay, yeah, because as parents of kids who have anxiety disorders, we have one-on-one sessions with the therapist where we get to share information that our child's not sharing and that. So I'm just imagining this child who, even if their biological parent still has rights, they're not in a position to advocate for their child. And just thinking about those kids really need that. And
absolutely.
I was looking at your training, and I love that you have the Advocate University. I was kind of curious about that, what that is and what that's about.
What the CASAs go through to become a CASA, right?
Yes. So I mentioned before that we do have a larger CASA program in the nation, in California especially. And so we do get asked the question a lot. So what is your recruitment process? What does that look like? How do you attract CASAs to your program? And part of that process, I think, is for a community member who hears about the opportunity to become a CASA thinking, how will I be prepared for this volunteer opportunity? And how will I make sure that I am ready for that opportunity when it comes? And so we do have a very comprehensive training program called Advocate University, which is designed to prepare soon-to-be CASAs to advocate for their child in the foster care system. And we cover many topics at Advocate University, but some of the topics included and those topics and classes are all taught by our staff, include dependency law, so background into juvenile court cases and what you can expect, educational advocacy, which we've already touched on, working with biological parents, early intervention and understanding childhood trauma, in addition to court report writing and understanding internal bias and privilege. Mm-hmm. And during the training process, CASA trainees engage in activities such as writing a practice court report. So when they write their first court report to be submitted officially, they're ready to do that. And they also review many case scenarios, such as the one I presented at the very beginning of our podcast, talking about scenarios with educational advocacy, perhaps, so they can hear, these are some of the situations you might face as a CASA. And here's what we have done to successfully address those scenarios. And we discuss it from there to help prepare them to be assigned to their first case.
And it's just amazing how in-depth it is. And I still just am amazed by this whole program that exists. I know someone we interviewed before this, but for our listeners who haven't listened to prior podcasts, the CASAs are volunteers. And we talked about this with a former interviewee that they're not coming to this as a job. It's not an income that they're receiving. And they told stories about how when the kid finds that out, they're just blown away that this person is volunteering their time
to help them. Yeah.
And how powerful that is, that they're in it because they care in their heart and wanting to help the child, and just realizing the power of that role that plays, because everyone else in the system, it's their job and they're getting paid to do these things. And
well, I was kind of curious too. I can only imagine the emotional strain that's on a CASA person, as well as we've talked about the children and what they go through and the anxiety. But does the CASA system have some kind of therapy or process to help them? Because like I said, I can't imagine being in court and having to hear some of the stuff that might be going on for a child and that doesn't get to them. So do they have some type of therapy or some type of system to help them in that, support them in that part?
We do. We have many built-in supports, and the first built-in support is someone like me. So I supervise a caseload of CASAs, and there are 26 advocacy supervisors just like me on our staff who supervise a caseload of CASAs, sometimes 40 to 50 CASAs at an upper number. And I can't tell you how much of my time over the past 10 years supervising CASAs has been conversations in person, on the phone, before or after court, or before or after what is a difficult meeting on behalf of our children, talking about their experience, their hopes, perhaps if they've run up against a roadblock, we talk together about troubleshooting and how we're going to move forward with a plan, problem solving. And so our first line of defense is that every CASA is assigned a supervisor who they can always talk to solve case issues, to talk about possibilities, and also sometimes to vent if they're feeling frustrated or if they're feeling perhaps something didn't go the way we hoped it can go. And then another built-in support we have for our CASAs, which is limited because we are bound by confidentiality. So there's not a lot we can share about our specific cases and case children with many people, but we do have small group meetings amongst Voices for Children. So staff host meetings and CASAs can come together in a small group setting and talk about case issues together and hear advice from Voices for Children staff and from other CASAs who may have more experience or different experience than they've had with a particular case issue they're facing at the time. So that's another wonderful opportunity for us to support our CASAs and make sure that they have a forum to share about something they're facing and to problem solve together. And then finally, Dawn, as you had mentioned or had you wondered if this does exist, we do have a therapist who is available to talk to CASAs if they ever have a concern that gets to that level. And that's a wonderful support we're also able to offer. So at Voices for Children, we are completely invested with our CASA volunteers. We want them to feel comfortable and supported. We know that process is not always the easiest when it comes to very difficult topics in the juvenile court system. So we do make sure to try to meet people where they are with what they need and provide as much support as possible.
Well, that sounds wonderful. And I'm just sorry. Well, I was just wondering, in this you mentioned the dependency system, and I'm just wondering if that's like an all-encompassing umbrella of what the foster, as how you described the whole foster system. Is that correct? Is that what that really means?
Yes, and yes, I feel I use it as more of a catch-all umbrella phrase, but when I'm saying it, I think what I have in mind is kind of well, maybe three branches. I was going to say two, but maybe three. So the first branch being the child welfare system. So that's where, you know, all of our juvenile court cases originate. So where children are sometimes detained and taken into custody. So where a child welfare case starts. And then I also have in mind when I'm talking about dependency as a whole is the court system. So the juvenile court judges and different geographical areas in San Diego that hear cases. And so that is where the cases are heard, where matters are discussed and where decisions are made. And then of course, the third branch that I have in mind would be our volunteers, who, as you mentioned earlier, Gina, are not paid, not professionals in that sense to be involved with the case, but are there through our organization. So as the third branch that I'm thinking of collectively when I talk about the juvenile dependency system.
Wow. Okay. Do you have a?
Not off the top of my head. I just, you know, we've learned so much with this topic. It's an area, as you know, our podcast is all about advocating for children and families and parenting and things involved in that. And this is an area we don't have any personal experience in. We don't even have family members close enough to know about, you know, that have dealt with the foster care system. And so it's been very eye-opening and educational for us. And we know that I have known people who've acted as foster parents before, but just knowing these resources that are out there and understanding it for people who want to help out in some way. You know, there might be people listening who want to become a CASA, or people who would like to help, you know, support it financially or any other way, because obviously the system needs as much help as it can get, as we know that there's never enough people and support for all the kids that are out there.
Well, is there a message you would like to get out in this? We've gone all over the place here as far as different, great stuff, great information, but is there a message you'd like to be able to get out to an audience to let them know?
Yes, thank you so much for asking that. Something that has been on my mind lately over the past few years, I would say, as you know, I'm sure the COVID pandemic has been very difficult for everyone, but I think from what I've read, from what I've experienced, it's been very difficult for children. And from what I've seen, that's been magnified for our children who are in foster care.
Oh my.
So with that, there is more of a need than ever for support for children in foster care, as we're seeing the ripple effects from COVID and some maybe problems that have arisen for our case children during that time. So with that, right now, Voices for Children, as we started 2023, with that in mind, we've started a campaign that is called Your Voice, Your Future. And with that campaign, our goal is to match 100 children on our waiting list, so who are waiting for a CASA volunteer, to a child by May. And so that campaign information can be found on our website, which is www.speakupnow.org. And in addition to directly recruiting CASAs as part of this campaign, we're also asking people to recommend their friends or someone they know, a family member, to become a CASA. So also we can invite people if they're not able to become a CASA at this time, or if they don't know someone who they want to recommend to become a CASA. We would like to ask people to invite Voices for Children to come and speak to groups, whether it's their workplace, a church, a nonprofit, any sort of group they might be involved with. So we can share a little bit more about what we know about children in foster care, their needs, and our program, and of course, the need for more CASA volunteers.
We will have those links of that information that you shared on our page for people to be able to check that out further. And are there other resources that you want to recommend or ways people can learn more?
Our website is a wealth of information. The campaign, Your Voice, Your Future.
Hey, this is Don breaking in here. There's more to this podcast, but I wanted to take a moment here for a correction. Diana contacted me after we did the interview in wanting to correct the name of the campaign. The campaign is Your Voice, Their Future. And I hope that you'll go to their website and check out that campaign, maybe help out if you can. And now we'll get back to the remainder of the interview.
Is just one aspect of what we have on our website. For someone who wants to know more about foster care, the system as a whole, about the CASA model, and specifically about becoming a CASA volunteer in San Diego, there is all sorts of information on our website to find out more about that. And we also offer information sessions frequently through Voices for Children, where if someone has read a little bit about the CASA program and they want to learn more or ask questions, they can join an information session to learn a little bit more about the role and to ask specific questions they might have.
Mm-hmm. And we'll also share links for the parent organization with CASA to find, the local CASA organization in your area where you live.
Thank you.
Well, Diana, it's been wonderful to talk to you. That, like you say, your stories are wonderful and they're very empowering.
And we really appreciate, the work that you're doing is so powerful and supporting the CASAs, and it's such an important system. And, I've really enjoyed talking to you about it and learning more.
And we thank you for being on.
Yes.
Thank you so much for having me. I really appreciate the invitation and also your podcast and the focus on foster care for this series. I just think it's wonderful, and it's a great way to get information out there and to raise awareness.
Agreed.
So that's our podcast for today. We hope that you've enjoyed it. We'd love to hear from you. Make sure to leave us a comment. If you liked what you heard today, you can learn more about our parenting coaching program, our workshops, and more about Diana at our website, www.focusedhealthyfamily.com. You can follow us on Facebook at Focused Healthy Family. You can follow us on Instagram at Gina at Focused Healthy Family. And our blog and our podcast are on our website. And remember, how you speak to your children shapes their future.